Welcome to another edition of the official Jets podcast, the Draft Podcast, presented by Pepsi. We're here in the BetMGM studio with Double Trouble, Phil Savage, Rex Hogan, our first two guests to ever record in the BetMGM studio.
Yeah, but unfortunately they weren't at the desk with us across the way in the casual setting here, but we got it done. True professionals, great veterans, and Joe Douglas, we've said it multiple times here on the official podcast of the team. He's assembled a quality staff, and these are two guys that he relies on big time.
Very much so. Rex Hogan, the assistant GM to Joe Douglas. Phil Savage, basically senior trust advisor?
Senior personnel advisor.
Senior personnel advisor. Yeah, he trusts Joe Douglas, and Joe Douglas trusts him, But, yeah, they were both great, and right now, as we record this, some final meetings before the draft actually takes place. That's what's going on behind closed doors, setting the big board, breaking up clusters, and they'll talk about this, but it's just interesting to hear them talk about what goes on compared to what I think maybe misconceptions are about what goes on. Would you say that's a fair assessment on?
Well, what would you say are the most significant misconceptions?
I don't know. Maybe misconception was a bit of a strong word, but I would say, I think I said this to Phil, a lot of fans and a lot of people say, my team needs to come out with this position in one of these two rounds, or else everything is going down the deep end. But that's not the way that personnel or NFL personnel view it.
Well, I don't know if you would agree with this, but the thing that I have really keyed in on here as we've gotten closer to the draft is a lot of people look at the draft from a 40,000-foot view, and they assign numbers for every prospect, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It all depends how you view the prospects yourself for your organization, aligning with your systems too, because the scouts have to grade each prospect, but then you have to get information from the coaching staff, because there are certain traits they're looking for in these prospects. So I think a lot of people out there think in terms of the draft is you take the most talented player available no matter who it is. Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's not just based on talent. You have to draft well, but then you have to develop. So you're going to have difference of opinions in there because you have so many people floating out opinions. The way I view a player is going to be different than the way you view a player. But with that being said, there has to be consensus ultimately when Joe turns that card in that this is the right player for the New York Jets. And the right player for the New York Jets might not be the right player for somebody else.
Right. I think that there's almost 3 chapters. Chapter 1, the pre-draft process, gathering your information. Chapter 2 is the draft. And then Chapter 3, which a lot of people I think just overlook it, is the development of those players. And Chapter 3 doesn't come until training camp and for the rest of their first couple of years in the NFL.
Even with the 2020 draft class.
Right.
And the early reviews are very favorable. And look at what Mekhi Becton did and Denzel Mims and so on. But those guys, it's not the period at the end of the sentence. I think sometimes we look at the draft in terms of, this is the finished product. This is the ceiling. No, you are taking a talent and then you're going to mold that talent into what you want him to be. And there are certain traits the Jets are looking at for every position.
Right. Very well said. And we don't know what those traits are, partly because of the new schemes. It would be easier to figure out, okay, the Jets defense looks like this, the Jets offense looks like this. We don't know the answer to those questions yet. We'll probably get a sense of it maybe after the draft, but let's hear from Phil Savage and Rex Hogan on what's been going on the past couple months and now the past couple days leading up to the draft. All right, Phil, so when we're recording this, we're just over a week out from the draft, but what goes on between now, April 20th, and the first night of the draft on that side of the building and internally among yourself and Joe Douglas and everyone?
Well, hopefully we're putting the finishing touches on basically 11 months worth of work in terms of, some final report, some last checkups on players from a personality standpoint, just trying to fill in any final blanks on each prospective player that could become a New York Jet. And I'm not talking, of course, about the top players in this draft. I'm talking about all the guys down in day 2, day 3, and then ultimately the undrafted free agents. So a lot of finishing touches, and then a lot of internal conversations in terms of, okay, you know, are we sure these are the players that we have lined up this way? Are we sure this is the way we want it going into the first night of the draft? And of course, one of the beautiful things about the fact that it's spread over 3 days is now you get a chance to have a game plan, but then adjust and reset that game plan between day 1 and day 2, and then obviously day 2 and day 3. And that was something that really has changed here over the last decade or so.
Yeah, so many things to get to here with you, Phil, but what happens after the first night of the draft, after round 1? Because a lot of fans, the anticipation is so great for number 2 and number 23, but you have 8 selections after round 1, 5 in the first 3 rounds. So what happens with the board, and how do those discussions go after nights 1 and 2?
Well, I think a couple things happen. Number one, of course, you plug in the 2 or 3 players that you got a chance to select on night 1, and then you forecast, okay, in taking those players, how does it impact the ratings that we have at the other positions where we still may have a need? Do we reorder some things? Are we completely depleted at a position that we were hopeful that there were going to be more prospects available in the 2nd or 3rd round, or maybe even the 4th or 5th round? And do we need to make a move up? Or are the players that we like plentiful? And now, hey, let's decide to go ahead and move down. And also, do you start building some assets for a future draft in terms of, would we be willing to trade some of these selections that are in the later part of the draft where we may feel like we're full in terms of our roster makeup? There's really not a lot of room left in the end in terms of adding a 6th or 7th rounder, so let's spin that pick off for a future pick. So those are definitely a couple of the things that you look at in terms of assessing what you just did and how it might impact the ratings that you have for day 2 and day 3.
Can you take us through, generally speaking, how the board gets compiled? Like, when does that start, and how does the initial layout go compared to where you're at now, where maybe you're just putting some last-minute touches on it?
You know, I think for each individual scout, it really starts with the first player that they grade for the previous fall. You know, usually during training camp. This year, of course, we were not allowed to go to college practices, but nevertheless, for the individual scout, I think it starts with the very first player that you grade. For the organization and the team board, which is the most important thing here that we're talking about, it really starts in December when we have our first set of preliminary draft meetings. Then in February, where all the information is brought to the table, and it's really laid out in terms of, you know, what do we think about the player on the field, off the field, character-wise, ability-wise, his internal intangibles, his external character, his on-field performance or production. How do all those things pull together, and where would we rank this player? And I think that's one thing that fans don't realize. Yes, we have a draft board with all the different positions listed and the players ranked beneath their different respective position, but we also rank the players vertically, 1 through whatever number it ends up being. Typically, it used to be 150 players. I think nowadays you could really rank the top 120 on a given board, and you would be able to get through a 250 selection draft and not run out of names, believe it or not. So ultimately, that February meeting, then you fast forward to April where the coaches have some input. They've done their evaluations. You've also been out to the schools and done some pro day work, gotten some official measurables in terms of height, weight, speed, jumping ability, explosive numbers. And then you have a chance to really do one more once-over and put the board up and also rank the players vertically. And I think ultimately those decisions that are made, a couple weeks ahead of the draft, a week ahead of the draft, and maybe, just maybe, a few days before the draft. You want to have all those really hard discussions at that point so that when you get on the clock, you've already decided, was it Smith or Jones or Thompson? And what order did we put them in 2 weeks ago? What order were they in 48 hours ago? And now, here we are on draft night, and Smith and Jones are still there. Thompson's been picked, and we decided 2 weeks ago that Smith was the better option for us. And really, that's how it works. I mean, we try to simplify a very complicated situation that is impacted by a lot of different variables.
I have a two-parter for you. You are the senior personnel advisor for Joe Douglas, so you provide insight on player personnel's philosophy. What would you say about the Jets' philosophy at its core, and also how did you see that philosophy come to life during free agency?
Yeah, I would say, just as a general rule, we want to try to identify and acquire big, fast, physical, tough, and smart players. And, again, it's a situation where there's so many different styles of offense and defense out there in the college game and then in the NFL. But what we're trying to do is identify the players that are going to best fit our systems on offense, defense, special teams. But even beyond that, how are they going to fit in the locker room? How coachable is this player? How is he going to be able to help other younger players that are on our roster? And that really is a piece of free agency that was important to us, because when you make a coaching change and you have a new staff coming in, Coach Robert Saleh and his staff come in with a different requirements, different skill sets at different positions, then we're trying to find not only the best players that have those different characteristics, but also the ones that can have a positive influence and show our other younger prospects what it takes to be a professional football player and to do it successfully.
How would you describe the relationship between scouts and coaches? EA asked you about the Joe Douglas philosophy. Then Robert Saleh comes in with the organization, hires a coaching staff, and it seems like what Robert Saleh believes in is also what Joe Douglas believes in. But then you have to scout for a little bit something different, at least. So I'm just curious how you would describe the relationship between the coaching staff and the scouts.
Yeah, I would say that anytime you're going through a transition between coaching staffs, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. And I know in our most recent draft meetings, I felt like I learned something with every position group that we covered, from Coach Saleh's assistant coaches and coordinators who were speaking in the meeting. And so with that said, we always talk about, and everyone focuses on the head coach and general manager relationship, but it really goes far beyond that in terms of that stair step of coordinators and directors, assistant coaches that are position coaches, and area scouts or regional scouts. And so, everyone's got to be in alignment all the way through from top to bottom. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes when we're talking about, hey, the GM and the head coach are on the same page. And you have to start with that, but it's also very important all the way through both sides of the building, so to speak, between coaching and scouting, where there's a respect level and there's also a give and take level of communication between the coaches and the scouting staff. And if you get that, that really is kind of the secret sauce in terms of being able to draft successfully, develop players in a successful manner, and if you do those two things, ultimately you're going to win.
What was the importance of the pro days this year compared to maybe in past years? With no combine, you got to go back a ways without a combine for the National Football League. In terms of that data collection, actually having the first and last opportunity, unless it was the Senior Bowl, right, to get that data and then check it to what the film actually showed your eyes.
Yeah, Eric, outside of the live games we were able to attend during the fall, and then the week of the Reese's Senior Bowl and that game, the pro day at these respective schools was really the only opportunity that you had outside of those previous chances to see a player in person and see him on the field, not really even playing football, but going through those physical tests. But then after the workout, having an opportunity to talk to the player. And for some of the prospects, particularly underclassmen who were not eligible for the Reese's Senior Bowl, it is very important that we have that access to be able to shake hands with them, look them in the eye, maybe address a couple things that might be in their background that you want to talk about. So I would say the Pro Days definitely took a big step in terms of importance this year with no combine. Essentially, we had a combine over about a 6 or 8 week period, and it was just done on an individual daily basis, and then it was our job to try to pull all that information together and make it seem as if it was the combine where you could compare, all the corners or all the wide receivers within a given day. We had to do that really over about a 6 or 8 week period of time.
Phil, you have such unique perspective, and you were mentioning, I don't know if a disconnect is the right word, between fans and maybe what actually goes on behind closed doors in every NFL organization. But, I think a common, I don't know about saying, but fans going into a draft say, my team needs to draft this position in the draft and they need to do it early, etc. But can you take us into the thinking of what actually happens when you're a couple picks away and then you're actually on the clock, and what goes through the selection process, even though, to your point, a lot of the hard work is done in this time of the year before the draft actually happens?
Yeah, there's those two different philosophies. Take the best player available versus position of need. And I think, in all honesty, from December to February to the April meetings, of course, if you have a need and players are within a certain category or a certain level of your draft board, you're going to push up the player that is at a position that you really need the most. And so hopefully by the time you actually get to draft night, that conversation is already had, and there's some logic in terms of why you're taking the player that you chose. The other thing I would say as well is you never know in a given year which position is going to have the most depth. There's certain positions that have no depth, and then there's other positions that might have multiple prospects that you like. So that's where you have to make that value judgment of, okay, we only have one offensive guard left. Let's take him here because there are plenty of linebackers later. Or, hey, there's only one tight end we like. Let's take him here because, hey, there's plenty of cornerbacks that are going to be available later in the draft, as sort of just a random example. And so that's really, I've always termed it, the art of scouting is going out and seeing the prospects and trying to figure out, okay, how does he really fit with our particular club and in our particular systems. But then the art of the draft is something that's at a whole different level. It's one thing to line the players up and put them on a draft board. It's another to massage and manage that list and that draft board to get the players that you want and that you ultimately need to complete your roster and make it a successful team.
You were a GM yourself. You're a longtime scout. What are the nerves like for you, or the emotions draft weekend? Is it like it's Christmas Day, I can't wait to get under the tree? What actually is going on internally for you? I got to imagine there's a lot of adrenaline, even though you put a lot of work into this and you guys are ready to go.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely anticipation. I mean, as it sits right now, we know we're going to get 2 really good players on the first day of the draft. Now, what happened? Do we move up? Do we move down? I mean, who knows what's really going to happen? But the anticipation of learning who it is that you're actually going to be adding to the team, and the fingers crossed, the prayers that are said about hoping that certain players might get to a point where maybe you have to move up a few spots to get them, or maybe they just fall in your lap, or maybe there's so many players left, then you have that option of trying to trade back, knowing that you're still going to get a player that you like. But I think that the best drafters are the ones that have made a lot of their determinations and a lot of their decisions ahead of the game. It's almost like you've rehearsed it so much in practice that when you get to the game is easy. And through my experience over the years, I would say that when we were really well prepared and we had had some of those really difficult conversations and difficult choices where, when you're going through these meetings, there's 400 players that you can choose from. Ultimately, when you're on the clock, you're probably down to about 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 players as you work into the draft that you want to take. And, with that being said, I think the best drafters are those that really have a calm demeanor, and they're drafting players like a good play caller in terms of, okay, we're doing this to set this up for later. And I think the best drafters have a knack of knowing, okay, if we do this here, this is the ramification for us in the second round, the third round, the fourth round, and beyond. And to me, the ones that can kind of see beyond the moment are the ones that are are the best at doing that. And to me, last year, with some of the moves that Joe made, I think he's been around enough success in the draft room to know what it looks like, and he's got some instinct to it as well. And playing the draft board, that's the fun part of the draft weekend.
You mentioned Joe. Last year, his first draft, a very unique one, hopefully the only virtual one that he'll see. And from your perspective, EA and I spoke to Dan Spioski the other week, and he was talking about the benefit of being in person. And so I'm curious, on draft night for you, Phil, what is the benefit that you think as an organization that everyone will be in person as opposed to last year, which was virtual?
Well, I would say, everyone across the league and, hopefully, our staff. I mean, we were able to work through and adapt and adjust to all these changes that have happened in the last year. But there's no doubt there's a bit more of a comfort level, if you will, when you have your people around you to say, to give you some support or give you that wink or the thumbs up or, hey, don't do that. Sometimes the best move you make are the ones that you don't make. And so I think having your staff around you and in the same room, there's definitely some nuance in terms of communication that can take place that you can't get through a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams call. So I think that will benefit us, and hopefully it will pay dividends on all 3 nights of the draft.
We enjoy catching up with you as always. I just had one final one from me. How unique is this, the 21 selections over 2 years? Like you just talked about the flexibility. You can go up. You can use some of those picks if you want to. You could actually move back and acquire more picks, but not just the 21 picks, but where they're at. The 2 first-rounders this year, the 2 first-rounders in 2022, the 2 second-rounders in 2022. It's not just the accumulation of selections, it's where they are.
I think it's the most exciting part of being part of the New York Jets scouting staff, and I emphasize this a number of times during the regular season, is that while on the surface we're struggling, we're having a really difficult season, but guys, we have a chance to truly make an impact on this football team. And I've got friends that are with other clubs and other teams that they virtually have a handful of draft picks. They have no money to spend in free agency, and we have all of those things. So as a scouting staff, to have that carrot dangling out there in front of us that, hey, we can truly make a difference for this football team. It's exciting. It keeps our feet to the fire and our eyes on the prize, so to speak. And I think that's been, a real motivation for all of us, particularly on the player personnel side, because, we lived through a difficult season knowing that we were going to have a real opportunity to change this football team over the next couple of years.
All right, well, moving this forward to the draft, free agency is, of course, behind us, but how do they play off of one another? Because I think the conception is, well, all right, the Jets added an edge. They added a couple receivers. They're good there, but it doesn't feel like that's the case through the eyes of behind closed doors.
Sure, it's a balance between both. You're always looking for positions of need, but you're also looking for an opportunity to upgrade your roster. And that's where the teams that do it best have that delicate balance of adding players at positions of need who are also very high-end players. So we will always continue to look for that from both those scopes.
What stood out to you about the approach? From afar, it looked like it was disciplined, yet you were poised to strike and you were aggressive when you needed to be.
Yeah, we entered with that mindset. We wanted to be aggressive on guys that we targeted, but once we got into the negotiation aspect, we had to stay disciplined in terms of what was our breaking point, where was the point of we would walk away, from a financial standpoint. So I think, just like you say, EA, we entered it with an aggressive initial approach and then stayed disciplined throughout the negotiation aspect.
Rex, being that this is the group's second draft together, what differences have there been in the processes and the meetings leading up to where we are today? Has it been a more fluid operation, I guess, is what I'm really trying to ask.
Yeah, the transition of we were virtual from March of 2020 into this season. Now, for the first time in 14 months, we've able to get the college scouts back into the facility. So being able to communicate face to face and feel guys' body language and the way they speak about a player with more conviction, you feel it more in the moment in the room. But the process itself has stayed the course in terms of our evaluations, despite a limited number of college games that you could go to, the lower number of all-star games, and then the absence of the combine as well.
What changes in the personnel meetings from the time you guys met in February to the time you guys just spent here in April putting those final details together?
Where typically you get the medical information back after the combine, but the way they've structured it this year, pushing the combine back, the medical information's a little bit, it's delayed compared to previous years. So we still attack free agency with the college staff and the rest of the guys in-house, and where we'll fill in where we need or where we see fit in terms of hitting the pro days and being able to see the most players that we can from an exposure standpoint. So it's been unique with that, and the limited access that you can have with players of only 5 interviews that last an hour apiece.
Generally speaking, how would you define a successful draft weekend?
Adding a group of guys who are starters, sub-starters, developmental players who are going to improve the competitiveness of our team in addition to improving the talent of our team. I don't think you can measure it just after one season. I think we know more after year 2 and year 3. So in year 2 or year 3, if we're a playoff caliber team, it'll be because of the core of this group that we've added.
Rex, how do you weigh that old adage of need versus best player available? And at what point does it happen where you have a group of players and that's where need comes to play, where they're closely ranked together?
Yeah, you have to balance it. It has to be, you can't, for instance, if you have a defensive tackle who's similarly rated to Quinnen Williams, you don't necessarily want to add that same type of guy what you already have on the roster. So it's, some common sense just goes into it, but you balance it between the needs of your team and the overall talent.
Well, you mentioned not really being able to evaluate draft classes until a couple years down the road and the record of the team. Well, how much of an opportunity lies ahead, not only with this draft, the 10 picks, but the next year's draft with 11 picks, and 4 of which come in the first 2 rounds?
Yeah, it's huge for us. It's an opportunity. Typically within those first 2 to 3 rounds, you want those guys to either be starters or significant contributors as potential sub-starters like nickels or slot receivers, guys who have third down value. So with this year, with us having 5 picks in the first 86, and then 10 total, and then next year with 11, we feel like we've put ourselves in a good position to add to the youth of this roster that's going to continue to push us forward.
How much does this staff's experiences help them as you go ahead? I'm thinking about Joe Douglas. He's got 3 championship rings. Robert Saleh was just part of a build in San Francisco that saw them appear in the Super Bowl. You have been here twice, but the last time in between, you were in Indianapolis, and you guys changed that roster to a playoff caliber roster. So how do those experiences help this staff as they move ahead?
Yeah, it's unique because none of us had worked together previously. So it's good because we all have different experiences, and we've all had success and we've all had failures that we've taken from our previous organizations. You can learn from your success and failure, and you try and take those experiences and bring them here and put them in together in how we want to build it, how we want to structure not only the team but the players that we want to go after. So having that background and those experiences are going to help us all individually kind of form and shape our own model of what we want to build here.
Rex, do you have like a draft routine of the Thursday day? Like, maybe you eat the same thing. Maybe it's a good luck charm. Maybe it's a tie. I don't know. Do you have any kind of routine, or just every year is unique in its own way?
It will just be a green tie is the only unique thing that I do here for draft day. But outside of that, trying to treat it like a typical day.
If we were just talking about that before here on the podcast, is that I feel like you have to set a different wardrobe for each day. Thursday, that's when the suits come out. Friday, collared shirt, and then Saturday you can go jeans and polo, right?
Some guys do. Yeah, you see a lot of guys. I know back to Jimmy Johnson and Andy Reid seeing the Hawaiian shirts come out, but you're not going to see this guy in one of those.
Do you look at it overall, big picture-wise, not just this draft, but the opportunity ahead? 21 picks between 2021 and 2022. That gives you flexibility to do a lot of things. You can go up, you can go down, stockpile, trade for veterans. But where they are is very unique, too. You mentioned the 5 picks in the first 86, and then you go to 2022. You guys have 2 first-rounders and 2 second-rounders as well, 11 picks next spring.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity for us. Like I said before, we're adding young players who we feel like can be starters in those positions. And so adding those guys through the draft at starting level value, and hopefully some Pro Bowlers based out and infused in that group as well. So we're looking forward to the challenge of it.
What about the importance of day 3, too? Because I know everybody externally, they're thinking about number 2, number 23, even the second rounders. But I think it gets lost in the shuffle, the importance of day 3. From your perspective, you're the assistant GM. What does day 3 mean to you? Not only those 5 draft picks, but also you guys are going to get on the phones and try to get some unrestricted, priority free agents in here.
Sure, you're building the depth of the team, and hopefully some of the guys that you identify have some starting level traits that they can develop and make to a sub-starter level or starting level. But the bulk of those guys are going to bolster your special teams, or you can find a starting level punter like we did last year in Braden Mann, and then you can add depth to the special teams and to the entire roster. But guys did a really good job last year of identifying undrafted free agents who made our team and contributed to our team with Lamar Jackson and Javelin Guidry. So, hopefully we can go out and find some more guys like that.
All right, great stuff from both of those guys. We really appreciate their time. Is there anything that stands out to you with what either of them said?
Yeah, Phil Savage said the great drafters, they have to be in the calm while the storm is around them, because there's so much information coming at these guys, and you have to predict what's going to come your way down the line. So it's not just staying cool in the moment, but it's also forecasting what's ahead and putting your team or your organization in the proper position on draft weekend. The Jets, yes, they'll be taking a quarterback most likely with the number 2 overall selection. It's going to get a lot of attention, but Joe Douglas has a lot of work ahead of him, and so does this staff draft weekend with the 10 selections. And Rex Hogan said it. You're hoping you get starters with those first few picks, extending into the 3rd round. Then beyond that, you're looking at guys who can come in, give you some depth, and help on special teams.
Yeah, I think that what Rex said, what you just referenced, is good to hear, right? Because I think some people are like, well, this player, no, like, he's not good. He's not a Pro Bowl All-Pro, and he was drafted on day 3. It's like, well, maybe you're not expecting that. You're taking flyers on some people, developmental traits, and hopefully they become that. I mean, but those are not common, right? Obviously, you hear about the later round picks that emerge to Pro Bowlers or even beyond that, but that's not common.
Well, not initially. Like the Bryce Hall pick last year, we talked about the value at the time, and I think that he's going to be a fun guy to watch under Saleh, under Jeff Ulbrich, what they're going to be doing in the defensive backfield, because those physical traits, you think about the 49ers and the cornerbacks they've had over the years, the long limb guys, the physical players. Bryce Hall started a bunch of games for the Jets in his rookie season, but he could come on and, really shine, I think, in his second professional season. The point there is they took Hall knowing he's not playing early on. He's not contributing early on, but there's an opportunity for him to be a starter for us in year one and then beyond. So initially, those first couple rounds, you want starters. You're going to be filling needs, filling holes, and I think that's how you break those close
The
clusters. Yeah, right. The close clusters. But then those guys down the line, sometimes flyers, sometimes you just look at a guy and say he's going to be a reserve immediately, and then he's going to contribute on special teams, and then ultimately I think he's got starter potential.
Yeah, I think that I'm just interested to see what happens, not only early in the draft, day one, but also just all rounds. And not just because we work for the Jets, but because, one, the draft is so interesting. I think that's what makes the draft fun. No one knows what's going to happen, and that's why I feel like the number 2 overall pick, not a lot of people talk about it because most people assume they know who the pick is going to be.
I saw a couple of people on social media today saying, I'm sick of talking about the number 2 overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about pick 23, right? I mean, there are so many different options.
Well, you're going to be pumped Thursday night too, because you're going to be talking about 34. I mean, who's still on the board after day one, and how is this staff going to, look at the board after night 1 and night 2? Because on days 2 and 3, they're going to be at the top. Mm-hmm. They're going to be at the top, so they're going to be looking at, well, hey, we got a lot of options.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how it all breaks down in just a couple days. But that's all we have for this episode of the official Jets podcast, the Draft Podcast, presented by Pepsi.